It's nice to be with you again, talking about men on the Magnetic Masculinity Podcast, where we help men sort of look at strategies and practical ways that they can bridge the gap between achievement and fulfillment and redefine what it means to be a man as we evolve out of the emotional dark ages. So last time we talked a lot about the history of man and the history of masculinity and the sort of, I guess, maybe we could call it the nurture versus nature of why men do what they do and what their role is historically. And now maybe we can look at how that might be evolving, or specifically, how does the evolution of consciousness or the lowering of entropy play into the transformation of masculinity? And what do you think men's roles are or should be during this shift and this redefining humanity?
Okay, gee, that's a good, big question. I'm glad you started, though, with the evolution of consciousness, because that is the key. That's what it's all about. That's why we're here. That's our point, our purpose. And if we're not in consonance with that, then we're not actually doing it right. So let's start there. And consciousness evolution requires men and women to try to lower their entropy. Are you hearing bangs and disruptive noises in the background?
Yeah.
Good. I have some going on, but I put it on filter strong, and hopefully it won't bother you. But if it does, just let me know. Okay, so let me just start over that. Conscious evolution is a great place to start. To evolve the quality of your consciousness means to get rid of your fear. Get rid of your fear means get rid of your ego, get rid of your beliefs. Okay, so that is our goal. That's why we're here. That's what we're supposed to be doing. And whether we're men or women, that is our overall goal. Now, entropy, for those of you who are not familiar with that word, it's a measure of disorder, but it's also a measure of the amount of fear you have. More, higher entropy, more fear. Higher entropy, more ego. That means more self-centered. Higher entropy means that you're working from assumptions and beliefs rather than from facts and understanding. So we want to get rid of the fear, that ego, and those beliefs, and lower our entropy. And we talked last time, like you said, about how men got to be the way they are. It's evolutionary. Being a male human is an evolutionary thing, and we have certain characteristics about ourselves that come right out of that evolutionary pattern. It's the things that nudge us and push us. It's the things that make us be the way we are for the most part. And we can't just drop that. That's part of us, And it was developed, those instincts were developed, 200,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, over that period. And the environment was different. Instincts are developed to match up to an environment and the pressures of that environment. So instincts were developed for an environment that's now about 100,000 years old. And it's not exactly the environment that we have today. So you can expect some misfit between your instincts, the way you see the world, the way you should interact in the world, and what is actually kind of a low entropy connection with the world the way it exists now. So first thing is that we don't want to get crossways to our instincts. We can't say, well, they're just old. We don't need them anymore. So let's just ignore them. And if we feel a push or a shove from a deep level and we don't really know where it is, but that's what we have to do, then, we'll just stuff it down in the basement someplace and ignore it. That is not a good idea. When you start running over your instincts like that, you will make yourself neurotic. You will be working against yourself. It'll cause you problems, even if you're successful in doing it. At the being level, at the core of you, you need to work with those instincts. That doesn't mean you have to abide by everything they tell you. You still are aware. You have free will. You can say, no, not now, inappropriate, won't work, bad idea, and cancel that move. That's acceptable. You can always override what your instincts are telling you to do. And that's different than denying your instincts and just running over them and not paying any attention to them. So, one, be aware of your instincts, guys, and the way you feel, and don't feel embarrassed or shamed or anything else because you act like and think like a guy. Well, you are. You've got those instincts, and you're going to act and think that way. You can't help that. But you don't have to be a slave to your instincts either. You don't have to let them get in front of what you know to be a better action or a better thing to say or a better move or a better way of being in this particular instance. So, yes, you have the instincts. Yes, you need to work with them, not against them. But yes, you don't have to be obedient to your instincts. You can change. And as we change, because our environment has changed, and it's actually changed rather dramatically. You know, if you think of it, okay, the environment 200,000 years ago was rough, individualism, people fighting for each other for survival. Okay. And 100,000 years ago was exactly the same. And 50,000 years ago was exactly the same. And 10,000 years ago was exactly the same. And, 5,000 years ago was exactly the same. So we, Homo sapiens, have been around for about 200,000 years. And up until about, 500 years ago or so, it's been about the same. Everybody's struggling for survival, and life is cheap, and the strong take whatever they want, and the weak, struggle to stay alive. And that's been the name of the game. So if you look at evolution, you can see that it's been very consistent, and those instincts have served us well right up until probably the last eye blink of evolution, which is about 500 years out of 200,000. And now things have changed. Well, they've changed dramatically, and they've changed quickly in the terms of evolution. So here we are with instincts, about sex, about survival, about how to be, masculine instincts. And we find ourselves in a very different environment where our instincts can be problematical. But again, don't reject them, work with them, and tend to encourage them away from this or toward that, work with them. And talk to yourself and say, yeah, okay, I feel like I ought to do that, but that would cause a lot of trouble, so I'm not going to do it. And here's why, you see? And if you do that, then we will actually start to change those instincts. Instincts are a product of the environment. But we've had a lot of years where those instincts worked really well for us. Now we need to change them. So how long does it take to change instincts? What is it going to take, another 200,000 years? No, I don't think so. I think if we work with it and we're aware of it and we make conscious decisions, no, I don't want to go there in this situation. That doesn't apply. It may apply other times, other places, but not now. If we do that, I'd say it won't take more than 3 or 4 generations before we can change our instincts. I don't think they're not set in concrete, but it'll take some time. We're not going to change them, next week. We're not going to change them, in a decade, probably. But over several decades, yes, I think we can change them to the point that we've taken the edge off. We'll still have some of the basic survival and procreation stuff there. But the stuff that is problematical now doesn't really fit the environment anymore. That stuff will kind of, file off those rough edges to where they won't cause nearly as much trouble maybe as they cause, today. So that's what I mean by work with them, in your mind. Say, no, that's not helpful now. And then do what you know to be right rather than what your instincts are pushing you to do. So that's kind of the instinctual thing. And yes, we can change them. And no, it won't take forever, but it will take probably several generations of people, father to son to father to son to father and son, maybe three generations. And we can probably have most of those rough edges, toned down to the point that they're not as problematic as they are now. So that's kind of the key thing. We have to use our moral sense, our ethical sense, our sense of what's right. We have to learn how to understand those around us. We have to not just see things from our own perspective. That's a big part of the problem. If you just see things from your own perspective, then you tend to make poor choices. Lowering entropy means not just lowering it for yourself, but lowering it for everybody you interact with. In other words, a low entropy choice is a choice that lowers entropy for you and for everybody you interact with. It has to be for you and for the system. So the people, there are those people out there that when you make a choice, that choice affects them. Mm-hmm. And all of those people that are affected by your choices, you need to take them into consideration when you make a decision, when you make a choice. Now, that will require you to understand what their reality is like. Your reality and their reality, whether you're same sex or different sex, is going to be different. Everybody lives in their own personal reality. We think we live in just this one reality that we share. That's not the case. This is a multiplayer game. Everybody creates their own reality by the way they interpret the information they get. You get information, you interpret it. That your interpretation isn't necessarily what was meant by the person that sent you that message, but you interpret it, and that interpretation becomes your truth. That's the way it is in your mind. Now, that may not be what was intended in the person who sent you that message. And you have to realize that you live in your own reality, and everybody else is living in their own reality. And that makes communications difficult. So you have to work at this. This is not easy, but you have to try to see things from other people's viewpoints, other people's perspectives. It helps if you can lower your entropy to the point that you can feel other people's feelings. Be an empath. That helps a lot, because then you get a kind of an inside track on that person.
A feedback system.
Yeah, you can develop some feedback, but if you haven't grown up that much yet, then just being aware and asking questions. Well, how do you feel about this? What did you mean by that? Now, here's what I understand that you just said, and this is what I think you're about. But ask those kinds of questions, and you'll be surprised how many times you're wrong. Your interpretation of what's being said is just flat out wrong. And it works the other way around, too. Other people are interpreting what you're trying to say. And they interpret that in terms of their own background and history and beliefs and ego and fear. And what they're hearing and what they think you mean may be entirely different than what you think you mean. So this whole idea of communications is not a simple problem. It's very difficult to communicate with another human being. It's very difficult because you only know what you interpret and they only know what they interpret. And language is such that you can't really make a message to send to others be exact. You have to, let's say I have a feeling and I want to share it with you. That's really hard. How do you share a feeling? How do you take a feeling, turn it into words, and then send it over to another person? Well, you can't do that exactly, but you can approximate it. You roughly do it. Now, I will pick the words that I think explain my feeling to me. These would be words that I would understand if I were talking to myself. So I pick those words and I send them over to you. Well, those are not the words you would pick if that was your feeling. So when you then take those words and try to understand what I said, you come up with something different, because the words I chose are not the words you would choose. You'll interpret it into words that you think You know, you hear those words and it's your interpretation of what that means. So you see, there's error in the message itself, trying to put it into language. There's more error in the translating that message, by another person. So communication at its very best is terribly flawed and difficult. Now, take people who are fundamentally different. Okay, take a pygmy out of the middle of the Brazilian jungle and take a Wall Street banker and put them in a room together and let them have a conversation. You see, neither one would understand a word of what the other one was saying, even if they spoke the same language. Their experiences are so different. They just would have a hard time communicating, even if you just made them magically had the same, capability in language. They would still have a terrible time trying to communicate with each other. All right, now let's take a man and a woman. Same thing. They're terribly different. They see the world very differently. Their realities are different. What they mean by the same words is different. Their sensitivities are different. What upsets them and what makes them cry doesn't upset or make a man cry. It doesn't. They don't feel the same way. So now you're talking to somebody who interprets your words very differently than what you would intend them to interpret. And when they speak to you, you're interpreting their words in a very way that's different than what they really meant by those words. And the words themselves, like I say, they're only a rough approximation of the feeling that you're trying to get across. So see the problem? It's a really hard problem to communicate. It's easier if you're talking to somebody just like you. All right. I'm almost 80 years old. So I talk to another 80-year-old guy who's my same race, same socioeconomic, same, very much like me. Now, he and I can probably communicate about 80% accurately. But take that somebody who is not like me, and now you're down to maybe 60% or 50%. And take somebody that's just really totally different than me, and now you have a difficulty communicating. So be aware of that. Be aware that what you hear and your interpretation may not be what's being said. So don't jump to conclusions, fly off the handle, decide to get angry until you've explored it a little more. Ask questions. Say, did you mean this? Did you mean that? And 5 or 10 minutes later, you can maybe come to a kind of a resolution of agreeing on what was being said. But people have this problem. One, they don't talk to each other. They have issues. They have feelings. They get upset. They get hurt. They get annoyed, and they clam up, particularly males. This is a male thing. When males get, when they get a heavy load of information they're having trouble to deal with, they don't call up all their friends and chat about it. That's what girls do. Guys don't do that. They stuff it inside and they process it. They work on it, but slowly. It may take them several days to come to terms or some thought about what all that meant, what it means to them. But they don't share. Men have this idea that their personal problems are their personal problems, and they deal with them by themselves. They don't need to share it with anybody else. Females are just the opposite. They get a big personal load, and they just need somebody to talk to. They just need to share it. They need to go over it and get their feedback, and pretty soon their circle of friends, are all informed about this problem and what's going on and how it's happening. They all chat with each other, and that's their way of processing. So they not only process it in their mind, but they process it in the minds of all their friends and take all that feedback. And that's the way females approach things. So now you have a male and a female having an argument, and you see the problem. They're not agreeing on something. The language, they're not even communicating what the problem is. They have totally different styles. And she says, well, just tell me how you feel. He's sitting there. I don't have any feelings. I don't feel anything in particular. Can't tell you. So my feelings are just a jumble. I haven't figured it out yet. I need a few weeks to figure it out. They kind of get that. And the female needs a download of information so that she can process and run around and tell all her friends and they can process it. And it's just different. So what I would, say about, men and their instincts and how they need to work in today's reality is, one, be aware of how difficult communications are. Then communicate. What used to be a good idea to keep it to yourself because everything could be used against you is now not such a good idea. If you open up and share what you're feeling, even share your confusion.
Yes.
That's a good thing to do. Say, well, I don't know. I'm feeling like this and like that. Just be honest, and it will surprise you. It'll be hard first because you're not used to pulling out your feelings and talking about them. But the more you do it, the easier it gets. And the more you do it, you and your feelings will start to get to know each other. Because mostly with guys, they and their feelings aren't really all that good friends. They don't get to know each other too much. The feelings just stay down there in feeling space, and the guy never gets around to articulating them in any way. So because of lack of practice, men are not good at articulating their feelings. Mm-hmm. So if you're a female and you're saying, well, just tell me about it. Tell me what you feel. It's not that the guy is trying to hide his feelings from you. For the most part, he doesn't know what he feels. Mm-hmm. And he feels something, but he can't articulate it. Mm-hmm. It's not in his DNA to be articulate about his feelings. He can stumble around and give you some rough ideas of what they are. I feel bad. I feel hurt. I feel used. I feel whatever. But when you want more information, well, what does that mean? It's not he's holding back and refuses to talk to you about it. He doesn't know. He doesn't have that articulation because in his background, his instincts are keep it to yourself, deal with it on an emotional level, not on an intellectual level. You deal with it down inside that emotional space. And eventually those emotions will, like the jury, out. The emotions go figure it out on their own, and then they'll send him up a result. And, you should, feel like this or like that. And that'll be his result. And that's what he'll do. But that process is not one that he does intellectually. It's not something he does in his cognitive processing. He does that pretty much within the emotional space, in the feeling space. And most of that is really outside of his intellectual reach. Mm-hmm. It happens automatically inside. All those feelings just sitting there and bubble around, and a thought will pop up and it goes back down. And eventually, a week later, he kind of knows what he feels. And it may take that week to get there. Whereas girls, their feelings just bubble right up, and they can talk your ear off in a second, before they get their feelings into their intellect and into their mouth right away. And they're ready to go on that. And that's part of the communications problem. Guys don't function like that. But females think that men work like they do. And men think that females work like they do. Because everybody judges that everybody else is sort of like them. Mm-hmm. And male to male, that works reasonably well because, a lot of men have a lot of similar characteristics. And female to female, that works pretty well. But male to female, female to male, thinking that other person is like you is a big mistake. Right. Because we're not anything alike.